Respect is both given and it's earned across all the ages. Younger people oftentimes don't realize that older people, they don't think about them feeling diminished or ignored or not valued. And then younger generations also, we don't realize that younger generations might be feeling diminished or not valued because oftentimes we judge them for the way they're caring for their life or their family. They don't. Consider yourself hugged. We are Tami and Michelle, and your weekly hug starts right now. Hey friends, just me again today. Michelle will be joining us again next week. We have a really great next week. We're interviewing someone I used to travel and speak with, Joy Huber, to talk about solo travel for women, and she was amazing. But today I want to share something it's like been on my heart for a while. But you know how when you feel tugged with something and you haven't quite formulated why or what, and then something happens that makes you go, okay, this is a story I want to tell. So I have two, maybe three, like stories to frame this up. And then I've jotted down some notes about what I want you to take away from it. But I also want you to feel loved and supported through this. I don't want you to feel judged or shamed or anything like that. So those are my goals for the day. So the first story I want to share was me watching the news a few weeks ago. And I actually did TikTok videos about two of these stories. So a few weeks ago, I'm watching the news and it's about the government shutdown. And there's a video in an airport. And because they're talking about the impact on airports. And there's a young woman and she's holding the hand of an older woman. And if you've been in an airport, so often everyone's walking fast. So this younger woman is walking fast. And the older woman, it looked like it could have been her grandmother. And I'm going to say it looked like she might have been in her 80s. And she was having to not run, but almost skip a little bit just to keep up. Now, again, let me go back to the shaming thing. It wasn't horrendous. This woman was not abusing this older woman. She was in a hurry. It wasn't awful, but I had Tim rewind it like a couple times and I recorded it with my phone. So it will be in the YouTube video. So if you're just listening, I've explained it. If you are on YouTube, you can watch the video. I've blurred out the faces. I've taken all um, marks about what airport it's in because there is no shame here. But it broke my heart to watch this older woman kind of being like just pulled through the airport. Okay, fast forward a few days later, there's a young mom who lives in my neighborhood, and she comes over to trim Lisi's nails. You all have heard of me talk about Lisi, my crazy cat. I love her, but she is, and I can't trim her nails. So this woman comes over and trims her nails, and she came over while Tim was gone on a trip. And when she came in, I think I said something like, the house is a mess, Tim is gone. So I packed my schedule with all kinds of things to get done because it's harder to get done when he's home. And so when I'm by myself, I'm trying to get things done. And then I stopped and I said, oh my gosh, I, I'm sorry I'm saying that to you. Like, you're a single mom with 3 young kids. And here I am complaining that I can't get things done when just my husband is here. And she said, no, gosh, you've already done this. You've already lived the life of this single mom with kids at home. And I thought, wow, that was so like honorable and respectful. And then she told me that, and we started talking about that, the generational thing. And she said, when I'm out and I see a young mom trying to take care of, let's say, like a 2-year-old having a tantrum, I always try to encourage them and say, "You're doing a good job, and if I can help, then I help." Wow. Okay, one more story. Let me try to frame all these thoughts. This was a story in my book, The Stress Club. If you've been following me at all lately on my personal TikTok and other social media as well, but I am getting ready to publish the online course. Like, I was hoping for end of October, but in reality, it's going to be the first couple of weeks in November. But I have been unapologetically posting about this concept of the stress club. So, one of the stories in my book, I interviewed women, and I don't remember verbatim, but she was talking about her mother in law. And she was saying that her mother in law, who was, I guess, an older woman, at, I don't know, 60s, or, but no kids at home anymore. And she was saying that her mother in law was talking about being tired and maybe resting or taking a nap. And this woman in my study, a young mom, said something like, "Wow, must be nice. Like, you have no idea. You have no one at home to take care of." All right, 3 stories. What I want to talk about is what I'm just calling generational care, generational compassion. When I watched that story and or watched that spot on the news, it just sparked something. So I said 3 stories, but honestly, okay, it's 4. It's actually 4 stories. The final story is my mom. And you all have probably heard the story of my mom. It's in my book. I've done a podcast about it. The story of my mom is what really shaped my entire life. Mom had debilitating mental health issues. She did not do a great job of raising my sister and me. I had debilitating mental health issues. My sister has struggles. And so it was rough. And my sister had lived with my mom for most of her life. Mom lived with me for a while. We both had to basically care for mom even when we were children. So you can imagine the resentment that that sets up, having to become an adult when you're a child, having to take care of your mom for basically your whole life. So there was a lot of resentment, there was a lot of anger, and I never was abusive to my mom. I didn't treat my mom horrible, but I remember, like, she would call me. Sometimes she would call me and my sister 10, 15, 20 times a day. And there was always the guilt. Well, fine. Just don't take my calls. I'll just sit over here alone and probably die. Some of you, I can feel it out there. You're like, I know, I know. So, so many times I would answer the phone. What? I was just, eh. Okay, well, my mom's getting older. She's in her 70s. She's sick. She had bypass surgery when she was, I think, 59. She had all the smoking, obesity, um, not taking care of yourself illnesses, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, high cholesterol. I mean, high blood pressure, I said that, all the things. Obese. It was just awful. 24/7 option. Her life just was not good. So she's getting older. She's getting sicker. And she even begins to start showing some signs of dementia. So there was a time when I got a phone call that she was in the ER because her nose was bleeding and she had this just massive blood loss. So I go to the hospital, they have admitted her, and I find out that the blood loss is because she was picking her nose. Picking her nose. Well, then I realized it's not like a toddler picking their nose, it's obsessive behavior. Fear behavior. Like, if she ever felt anything in her nose, she would just, or her fingers or anything, she'd just pick, 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 pick. And it was so bad that she had to have a blood transfusion, and they had to pack her nose. Now, I've never had that, but if you've ever had it, and you might know what it is, but they literally shoved gauze, both sides for her, up and packed her nose until it was completely tight. Can you imagine how scared she was? So I go to the hospital. And I learn all of this, and I go in her room, and she's sitting on the edge of the bed, and she's just rocking, and she's just fidgeting and touching her nose, and she's obviously distressed. And I sit down beside her, and this nurse walks in, and my mom is touching her nose. And the nurse scolds my mom and says, "Miss Martell, I told you, don't touch your nose." And in that moment, my mom put her head on my shoulder and she starts to cry a little. Now, you also need to know that my mom was a manipulative crier her entire life. And I'm sure that's part of the reason why I just don't cry. I hardly ever cry. It takes a lot. Mm. So when she would cry, it would just tick me off. But she puts her head on my shoulder and she's crying. And in that moment, I realized that I never wanted my mom to have that sort of fear, that that confusion at my hands or anyone else's. And in that moment, I knew that I needed to make some changes. And so I did. And I'm not saying it was easy, but I remember, like, I live a Christian lifestyle, so the Bible is my guide. And there is the commandment, honor your mother and father. And it talks about it more than just in the 10 commandments. But I thought, what does that mean? And when I saw this video of this woman and maybe her grandmother, I don't know, in the airport, I thought, what does it mean? And so I had to, during that time with mom, I had to really put some thought into what it meant. And for me, first of all, let's talk about what it didn't mean. For me, it didn't mean I needed to sit there with my mom 24/7. It didn't mean that I needed to let her treat me poorly. It didn't mean I had to answer 25 phone calls in a day. So what it did mean was to show her compassion and respect, to care for her, but that didn't mean that I always needed to be the one who did it. I needed to organize that care. She did wind up, she was in an assisted living when she died in 2016, but it was an amazing place for her to be. And it changed her whole life. That's a whole nother story. And I'll put a link to that in the show notes, but it changed her life. When she died, she became this joyous, wonderful person. Part of it was because of being in that assisted living, and those women made her like come to lunch and do all the things that she had resisted. And she became a rock star. And my sister and both of us, we changed the way that we treated her. And I think all of this made a big difference in her life. So that's what honor meant. It didn't mean I had to be the one to give her a bath every day. It didn't mean I had to be the one to take her to the doctor every day. Like, I moved away to California for a couple of years. I had to figure that out. But at the bottom line for me meant that I needed to show respect and compassion to her. It was not easy. It does not mean that I never answered the phone, what? Or that I was never harsh with her. But when I kept reminding myself of that hospital moment and that I never wanted her to feel like that again, that's when it really spoke to me. And then with the woman who, my neighbor, when she said that to me about me being in an older generation and then about the women being in the younger generation. Now, listen, we can include all people here, men and women, but you know, my heart is to talk to you. So if you're a man listening, yes, it's just my heart and my experiences as a woman, as a daughter, as a mom. And this applies also if you're not a mom, right? Just showing that compassion for younger and older. So when my neighbor said those things, it struck me in so many ways because a couple years ago, I was doing a seminar in Sedona and I was at the pool and I saw this dad and he had a little boy, he was probably 5, and he was saying, "Don't run, don't run, don't run." And what is a little boy doing? He's running. And the dad is trying to get him to stop and they were too far away. But what I wanted to say to him was, "Good job, Dad." And then I had this video script playing in my head where he would say to me, "Thank you for having gone through this and already done it and blazing a trail for me." And I thought, that's the way it should be. And so I so respected what my neighbor did. And then for the woman in my book, this is so much of what I talk about in the stress club is getting our value from suffering, and that if other people aren't suffering as much, then somehow they become invalidated. And I think about like the older generation, and I'm like, okay, well, just because they don't have two, three, one, four kids running around, or just because they're not in the season of their career where they're working 10 hours a day, or just because they don't have all of these events that they're doing, or does that mean they're not validated? I want us to validate all the generations. That's such a beautiful vision. I don't know exactly how it happens, but I did write some things down. I wrote 7 things down, and of course I'll post them in the show notes. I hope that they'll be fairly organized right now when I read them to you. And then I'll put a few more details in the show notes. The first thing I wrote down is that I didn't mean to isn't always enough, that being aware is the key. So again, not shaming this woman at all. If you are caring for an older person in your world right now, that is tough. Please remember, you don't have to do it alone. It takes a village. You don't have to suffer by yourself. I don't care what the world says. We need to do it together. So I want to say that to you first. And I want to remind us that being aware is key. Like with my mom, I unintentionally disrespected her so many times because I was moving fast. I was distracted. I was impatient. I had so many things going on. And all those things are real. We can have two things at the same time, all of those things, but also remembering to pause for just a moment, to slow down for just a moment, to look behind me to see if I'm unintentionally dragging this person along. That's the first thing I thought of. The second thing is that respect is both given and it's earned across all the ages. You know, younger people oftentimes don't realize that older people, they don't think about them feeling diminished or ignored or not valued. And then younger generations also, we don't realize that younger generations might be feeling diminished or not valued because oftentimes we judge them for the way they're caring for their life or their family, or people use phrases like millennials, they don't care anymore, younger people don't want to work, and I don't like that. I'm sure there are younger people who don't want to work, or parents who are making mistakes in parenting, but don't we all? So maybe not judging, but respecting and trying to help them. The third thing, generational roles are shifting. And so we need to shift as well. You know, one of the Pew Research Center, and I'll post that link there, but the sandwich generation is real. I was in it for a while. So you may be someone who's caring for an older parent and you have young children at home. You're trying to have this multi generational life, and it can be really hard. And as people are living longer, this is going to become more and more common. And you may become a person of an older generation caring for an even older generation. You know, it may not just be, we call it in one of the trainings I do for another company, the club sandwich generation. It's just not me caring for a parent and also having children. It's me caring for a parent and then another parent and then as we're getting older, it's going to be more complex. And so we need to have a mental mind shift. And one of those things that I can say is preparing for that, looking at the fact that caregiving may become, probably will become a role in your life at some point, and mentally, physically, financially preparing for that. And, you know, I look back on that time caring for my mom, it was so hard, but I never have regretted it. And it was a time where I learned and I grew so much, and I taught my children a lot. because my children would treat my mother the way that I treated my mother. If I was frustrated with her, they were frustrated with her. If I taught them empathy and compassion, they treated her with empathy and compassion. We have a role that is very powerful as leaders, as teachers. Fourth thing I made note of was also another bit that I saw in the news, and I didn't actually record it, but I'll try to post it. It was the fact that multi-generational households are increasing across the United States. And one study that I'll post found that it has nearly quadrupled in over a decade. And some of the reasons that many people in the US are starting to live in multi-generational households: financial pressures, think post-pandemic, caregiving needs. Well, it's easier to care if we're living in the same household, and some cultural expectations. There are a lot of benefits. I'm going to mention that again in a minute. But also, there comes with that some of the difficulties, boundary issues, keeping your autonomy, privacy, the pacing, who plays what roles. So, making that decision, what I said in the last point about having mentality shift, that needs to be a decision that is weighed and includes multiple people and multiple perspectives and thinking of lots of ideas before that decision is made. But I think it's interesting. The fifth thing I wanted to mention is how caregiving is common and it's costly. Financial burdens are real when it comes to caring for another generation. So, one study showed there's an estimated 53 million adults in the US providing unpaid caregiving. And there are a lot of sacrifices that come with this. So, when we think about these younger generations and what they may have to give up for the older generations, they're making sacrifices, taking on debt, and then if they're a little bit older, delaying retirement, withdrawing from their savings, from their 401ks. So this means, as we're looking across generations, remembering again, it takes a village, but we need to look at our compassion, maybe learning about finances. It may be getting counseling, rest, community, all of these things, because the financial burden is huge. So those of you who are in the younger generations, and as I'm talking about people living to older ages, just think about that in your financial plan. Think about, okay, do I need to have a mindset shift of what my finances might look like? So another thing, number 6, that I wrote down is that we can look at cultural models to teach us how this might work. So in many non-Western cultures, there's this practice of honoring elders, intergenerational living, reciprocal care. Another story, I was in an airport years ago, and there was a young woman who was a physician. We just struck up a conversation, and I can't remember where she was from. Maybe Egypt, somewhere in that area. And she told me she had a baby, I think. And I asked her something about 'cause she was traveling. And I said something like, that must be hard. And she was telling me that she lived, in these multi-generations, and that they all participated in the care of each other. And I thought that was a beautiful picture. I do understand that, and I mentioned this again about multi-generational households, it is not all butterflies and roses. I get that. But in many cultures that are non-Western, this has been practiced for a long time. I read about filial piety is a word, and this is a lot of in East Asia, their traditions is honoring their elders. I don't know how to pronounce this word. Ubuntu is a philosophy practiced in many African cultures about showing all humans respect, no matter what your age is. There's just so many ways, if we're interested in learning more about how we can respect across cultures, there's a lot to learn. So again, I'll post a little bit more about that in the show notes. And but questions that we want to look at, again, in the US, we have a very hyper individualistic culture. And if we go to living intergenerationally, if we look at other cultures, what do we gain? What do we lose? Because most of us have been raised individual. And then the final thing is just something I put like micro habits, just a few small things that I wrote down. Checking your pace when we're working with someone older. Are we going too fast? Are we pulling ahead? Ask versus assuming. If we see an older person, do you need help with that? And listen, not every older person wants your help. They may snip at you, but that's okay. At least you offered. Just being aware. If there's a young mom with kids or on an airplane, or if there's a woman that you see who's carrying a bunch of things who seems to be struggling, do you need help with that? People may find you weird, but I'm doing it. It's worth a try. Pause before critiquing people. Pause before when you're in, again, with people who may be older or younger in your world. Are they going too slow? I thought about this the other day. It was an older person, they were having trouble getting a card out of their wallet. And there was a brief moment where I went, huh? And I thought, what is wrong with me? I mean, I'm 61. I am not far from probably slowing down in that area. They're not doing anything wrong. And if I'm in a huge hurry, I need to figure out another way to go through that store line. I'm not saying, I don't ever get frustrated with, the woman juggling thing, but just pause. Allow them their dignity. Be careful about the eye roll. Um, Verbal affirmation to people. Just asking older people their opinion. Telling younger people they're doing a good job. And then finally, I wrote down self-compassion for yourself. If you're a caregiver, in whatever age you are, taking care of yourself, asking for help, inviting people to be a part of your world. Please don't go through this life alone, through every single generation that carries its difficulties. Ask for help. Look for the village. Provide the help. Set the boundaries. All of the things, because ultimately we only have each other and we're in this together. I don't mean to have, again, the rose-colored glasses. I know everything in life is not perfect. I know you may be living in a situation that's very difficult. There is always help. There's always help out there, even if it is looking for emotional and mental health support for yourself. Finding, we always post mental health resources. They are always in the show notes, and it is always okay to ask for help. So I'm glad you stayed with me. I'm excited to get this conversation going. Tell me about your experience in a store with an older person, what you see in an airport, lessons that you've learned. Tell me those stories. All right. And remember, we're still giving away the mugs. You can like, follow, and share on Instagram. You can follow and leave a comment on your favorite podcast platform. And then we're doing drawings for the mugs. So don't forget, do all the things. Go to all of our social media. And that's all I have. So until we're together next time, consider yourself hugged.